Impi is a Zulu word for any armed body of men. However, in English it is often used to refer to a Zulu regiment, which is called an ibutho in Zulu. Its beginnings lie far back in historic tribal warfare customs, when groups of armed men called impis battled. They were systematized radically by the Zulu king Shaka, who was then only the exiled illegitimate son of King Senzangakhona, but already showing much prowess as a general in the army of Mthethwa-Ndwandwe. King Dingiswayo in the Mthethwa-Ndwandwe War in the early 1810s. Genesis of the Impi. The Zulu Impi is popularly identified with the ascent of Shaka, ruler of the relatively small Zulu tribe before its explosion across the landscape of southern Africa, but its earliest shape as a purposeful instrument of statecraft lies in the innovations of the Mthethwa chieftain Dingiswayo. According to some historians, these innovations in turn drew upon existing tribal customs, such as the intanga. This was an age-grade tradition common among many of the Bantu peoples of the continent's southern region. Youths were organized into age groups, with each cohort responsible for certain duties and tribal ceremonies. Periodically, the older age grades were summoned to the kraals of sub-chieftains, or indunas, for consultations, assignments, and an induction ceremony that marked the transition from boys to full-fledged adults and warriors. The Ukabubwa kraal settlement elders generally handled local disputes and issues. Above them were the indunas, and above the indunas stood the chief of a particular clan, lineage, or tribe. The indunas handled administrative matters for the chiefs, ranging from settlement of disputes to the collection of taxes. In time of war, the indunas supervised the fighting men in their areas, forming leadership of the military forces deployed for combat. The age-grade intangas, under the guidance of the indunas, formed the basis for the systematic regimental organization that would become known worldwide as the Impi. Limited nature of early tribal warfare. Militarily, warfare was mild among the Bantu prior to the rise of Shaka, though it occurred frequently. Objectives were typically limited to such matters as recovering cattle, avenging some personal insult, or resolving disputes over segments of grazing land. Generally, a loose mob, called an impi, participated in these melees. There were no campaigns of extermination against the defeated. They simply moved on to other open spaces on the veldt, and equilibrium was restored. The bow and arrow were known but seldom used. Warfare, like the hunt, depended on skilled spearmen and trackers. The primary weapon was a thin 6-foot throwing spear, the assegai. Several were carried into combat. Defensive weapons included a small cowhide shield, which was later improved by King Shaka. Many battles were pre-arranged, with the clan warriors meeting at an assigned place and time, while women and children of the clan watched the festivities from some distance away. Ritualized taunts, single combats and tentative charges were the typical pattern. If the affair did not dissipate before, one side might find enough courage to mount a sustained attack, driving off their enemies. Casualties were usually light. The defeated clan might pay in lands or cattle and have captives to be ransomed, but extermination and mass casualties were rare. Tactics were rudimentary. Outside the ritual battles, the quick raid was the most frequent combat action, marked by burning kraals, seizure of captives, and the driving off of cattle. Pastoral herders and light agriculturalists, the Bantu did not usually build permanent fortifications to fend off enemies. A clan under threat simply packed the meager material possessions, rounded up the cattle and fled until the marauders were gone. If the marauders did not stay to permanently dispossess them of grazing areas, the fleeing clan might return to rebuild in a day or two. The genesis of the Zulu Impi thus lies in tribal structures existing long before the coming of Europeans of the Shaka era. Rise of Dingiswayo. In the early 19th century, a combination of factors began to change the customary pattern. These included rising populations, the growth of white settlement and slaving that dispossessed native peoples both at the Cape and in Portuguese Mozambique, and the rise of ambitious new men. One such man, a warrior called Dingiswayo of the Mthethwa, rose to prominence. Historians such as Donald Morris hold that his political genius laid the basis for a relatively light hegemony. This was established through a combination of diplomacy and conquest, using not extermination or slavery, but strategic reconciliation and judicious force of arms. This hegemony reduced the frequent feuding and fighting among the small clans in the Mthethwa's orbit, transferring their energies to more centralized forces. Under Dingiswayo, the age grades came to be regarded as military drafts, deployed more frequently to maintain the new order. It was from these small clans, including among them the Ilangeni and the Zulu, that Shaka sprung. Ascent and innovations of Shaka. Shaka proved himself to be one of Dingiswayo's most able warriors after the military call-up of his age grade to serve in the Mthethwa forces. He fought with his Izikva regiment wherever he was assigned during this early period, but from the beginning, Shaka's approach to battle did not fit the traditional mold. He began to implement his own individual methods and style, designing the famous short stabbing spear, the exiled, a larger, stronger shield, and discarding the oxide sandals that he felt slowed him down. These methods proved effective on a small scale, but Shaka himself was restrained by his overlord. His conception of warfare was far more extreme than the reconciliatory methods of Dingiswayo. He sought to bring combat to a swift and bloody decision, as opposed to duels of individual champions, scattered raids, or limited skirmishes where casualties were comparatively light. While his mentor and overlord Dingiswayo lived, Shaka methods were reined in, but the removal of this check gave the Zulu chieftain much broader scope. It was under his rule that a much more rigorous mode of tribal warfare came into being. This newer, brutal focus demanded changes in weapons, organization and tactics. Weapons and shields. Shaka is credited with introducing a new variant of the traditional weapon, demoting the long, spindly throwing spear in favor of a heavy-bladed, short-shafted stabbing spear. He is also said to have introduced a larger, heavier cowhide shield, and trained his forces to thus close with the enemy in more effective hand-to-hand combat. The throwing spear was not discarded, but standardized like the stabbing implement and carried as a missile weapon, typically discharged at the foe, before close contact. These weapons changes integrated with and facilitated an aggressive mobility and tactical organization. As weapons, the Zulu warrior carried the exiled, a stabbing spear, and a club, a cudgel fashioned from dense hardwood known in Zulu as the iwisa, usually called the knockerry in English, for beating an enemy in the manner of a mace. Zulu officers often carried the Zulu axe, but this weapon was more of a symbol to show the rank. The exiled, named because of the sucking sound it made when withdrawn from a human body, with its long and broad blade, was an invention of Shaka that superseded the older thrown ipapa. It could theoretically be used both in melee and as a thrown weapon, but warriors were forbidden in Shaka's day from throwing it, which would disarm them and give their opponents something to throw back. Moreover, Shaka felt it discouraged warriors from closing into hand-to-hand combat. Shaka's brother and successor Dingan reintroduced greater use of the throwing spear, perhaps as a counter to Boer firearms. As early as Shaka's reign, small numbers of firearms, are often obsolete muskets and rifles, were obtained by the Zulus from Europeans by trade. In the aftermath of the defeat of the British at the Battle of Isandlwana, many Martini Henry rifles were captured by the Zulus together with considerable considerable amounts of ammunition. The advantage of this capture is debatable due to the alleged tendency of Zulu warriors to close their eyes when firing such weapons. The possession of firearms did little to change Zulu tactics, which continued to rely on a swift approach to the enemy to bring him into close combat. All warriors carried a shield made of oxide, which retained the hair, with a central stiffening shaft of wood, the mgobo. Shields were the property of the king. They were stored in specialized structures, raised off the ground for protection from vermin. When not issued to the relevant regiment, the large Isilongu shield of Shaka's day was about 5 feet in length and was later partially replaced by the smaller Umbumblaluzo, a shield of identical manufacture but around 3.5 feet in length. Close combat relied on coordinated use of the IKLWN shield. The warrior sought to get the edge of his shield behind the edge of his enemy's, so that he could pull the enemy's shield to the side, thus opening him to a thrust with the IKLWA deep into the abdomen or chest. Logistics. The fast-moving host, like all military formations, needed supplies. These were provided by young boys, who were attached to a force and carried rations, cooking pots, sleeping mats, extra weapons and other material. Cattle were sometimes driven on the hoof as a movable larder. Again, such arrangements in the local context were probably nothing unusual. What was different was the systematization and organization, a pattern yielding major benefits when the Zulu were dispatched on raiding missions. Age-grade regimental system. Age-grade groupings of various sorts were common in the Bantu tribal culture of the day, and indeed are still important in much of Africa. Age grades were responsible for a variety of activities, from guarding the camp to cattle herding to certain rituals and ceremonies. It was customary in Zulu culture for young men to provide limited service to the local chiefs until they were married and recognized as official householders. Shaka manipulated this system, transferring the customary service period from the regional clan leaders to himself, strengthening his personal hegemony. Such groupings on the basis of age did not constitute a permanent, paid military in the modern Western sense. Nevertheless, they did provide a stable basis for sustained armed mobilization, much more so than ad hoc tribal levies or war parties. Shaka organized the various age grades into regiments, and quartered them in special military kraals, with each regiment having its own distinctive names and insignia. Some historians argue that the large military establishment was a drain on the Zulu economy and necessitated continual raiding and expansion. This may be true since large numbers of the society's men were isolated from normal occupations, but whatever the resource impact, the regimental system clearly built on existing tribal cultural elements that could be adapted and shaped to fit an expansionist agenda. After their 20th birthdays, young men would be sorted into formal ibutho regiments. They would build their I=Handa, the gathering place when summoned for active service. Active service continued until a man married, a privilege only the king bestowed. The Amabutho were recruited on the basis of age rather than regional or tribal origin. The reason for this was to enhance the centralized power of the Zulu king at the expense of clan and tribal leaders. They swore loyalty to the king of the Zulu nation. Mobility, training and insignia. Shaka discarded sandals to enable his warriors to run faster. Initially the move was unpopular, but those who objected were simply killed, a practice that quickly concentrated the minds of remaining personnel. Zulu tradition indicates that Shaka hardened the feet of his troops by having them stamp thorny tree and bush branches flat. Shaka drilled his troops frequently, implementing forced marches covering more than 50 miles a day. He also drilled the troops to carry out encirclement tactics. Such mobility gave the Zulu a significant impact in the local region and beyond. Upkeep of the regimental system and training seems to have continued after Shaka's death, although Zulu defeats by the Boers, and growing encroachment by British colonists, sharply curtailed raiding operations prior to the War of 1879. Morris records one such mission under King Impi to give Green Warriors of the Mthethwa-Ndwandwe regiment experienced a raid into Swaziland, dubbed Mthethwa-Ndwandwe by the Zulus, or teach the Mthethwa-Ndwandwe. Impi warriors were trained as early as age 6, joining the army as UDB porters at first, being enrolled into same age groups, until they were buted. Zulu boys accompanied the fathers and brothers on campaign as servants. Eventually, they would go to the nearest Ikanda to Kleza, at which time the boys would become Inquebane cadets. They would spend their time training until they were formally enlisted by the king. They would challenge each other to stick fights, which had to be accepted on pain of dishonor. In Shaka's day, warriors often wore elaborate plumes and cowtail regalia in battle, but by the Anglo-Zulu War of 1879, many warriors wore only a loincloth and a minimal form of headdress. The later period Zulu soldier went into battle relatively simply dressed, painting his upper body and face with chalk and red ochre. Despite the popular conception of elaborately panoplied warriors, each ibutho had a singular arrangement of headdress and other adornments, so that the Zulu army could be said to have had regimental uniforms. Latterly, the full dress was only worn on festive occasions. The men of senior regiments would wear, in addition to their other headdress, the head ring denoting the married state. A gradation of shield color was found, junior regiments having largely dark shields, the more senior ones having shields with more light coloring. Shaka's personal regiment Fasimba, having white shields with only a small patch of darker color. This shield uniformity was facilitated by the custom of separating the king's cattle into herds based on the coat colors. Certain adornments were awarded to individual warriors for conspicuous courage in action. These included a type of heavy brass arm ring and an intricate necklace composed of interlocking wooden pegs. Tactics: the Zulu typically took the offensive, deploying in the well-known buffalo horns formation. It comprised three elements: the horns, or flanking right and left wing elements, to encircle and pin the enemy. Generally, the horns were made up of younger, greener troops, the chess or central main force which delivered the coup de grace. The prime fighters made up the composition of the main force. The loins, or reserves used to exploit success or reinforce elsewhere. Often these were older veterans. Sometimes these were positioned with the backs to the battle so as not to get unduly excited. Encirclement tactics are not unique in warfare, and historians note that attempts to surround an enemy were not unknown even in the ritualized battles. The use of separate maneuver elements to support a stronger central group is also well known in pre-mechanized tribal warfare, as is the use of reserve echelons farther back. What was unique about the Zulu was the degree of organization, consistency with which they used these tactics, and the speed at which they executed them. Developments and refinements may have taken place after Shaka's death, as witnessed by the use of larger groupings of regiments by the Zulu against the British in 1879. Missions, available manpower and enemies vary, but whether facing native spear or European bullet, the Impis generally fought in and adhered to the classical buffalo horns pattern. Organization and leadership of the Zulu forces, regiments and corps. The Zulu forces were generally grouped into three levels: regiments, corps of several regiments, and armies, or bigger formations, although the Zulu did not use these terms in the modern sense. Although size distinctions were taken account of, any grouping of men on a mission could collectively be called an impi, whether a raiding party of 100 or a horde of 10,000. Numbers were not uniform but dependent on a variety of factors, including assignments by the king, or the manpower mustered by various clan chiefs and localities. A regiment might be 400 to 4,000 men. These were grouped into corps that took the name from the military kraals where they were mustered, or sometimes the dominant regiment of that locality. There were four basic ranks: Udboy assistants, warriors, in juniors and higher-ranked supremos for a particular mission. High command and unit leadership. Leadership was not a complicated affair. An induna guided each regiment, and he in turn answered to senior induna who controlled the corps grouping. Overall guidance of the host was furnished by elder induna, usually with many years of experience. One or more of these elder chiefs might accompany a big force on an important mission, but there was no single field marshal in supreme command of all Zulu forces. Regimental induna, like the non-coms of today's army and yesterday's Roman centurions, were extremely important to morale and discipline. This was shown during the Battle of Ndwandwe. Blanketed by a hail of British bullets, rockets and artillery, the advance of the Zulu faltered. Echoing from the mountain, however, were the shouted cadences and fiery exhortations of the regimental induna, who reminded the warriors that their king did not send them to run away, thus encouraged the encircling regiments remained in place, maintaining continual pressure, until weakened British dispositions enabled the host to make a final surge forward. Summary of the Shakan reforms. As noted above, Shaka was neither the originator of the impi, or the age-grade structure, nor the concept of a bigger grouping than the small clan system. His major innovations were to blend these traditional elements in a new way, to systematize the approach to battle, and to standardize organization, methods and weapons, particularly in his adoption of the Ilkwa, the Zulu thrusting spear, unique long-term regimental units, and the buffalo horns formation. Dingiswayo's approach was of a loose federation of allies under his hegemony, combining to fight, each with their own contingents, under their own leaders. Shaka dispensed with this, insisting instead on a standardized organization and weapons package that swept away and replaced old clan allegiances with loyalty to himself. This uniform approach also encouraged the loyalty and identification of warriors with their own distinctive military regiments. In time, these warriors, from many conquered tribes and clans, came to regard themselves as one nation, the Zulu. The Marian reforms of Rome in the military sphere are referenced by some writers as similar, while other ancient powers such as the Carthaginians maintained a patchwork of force types, and the legions retained such phalanx-style holdovers like the Trii. Marius implemented one consistent standardized approach for all the infantry. This enabled more disciplined formations and efficient execution of tactics over time against a variety of enemies. As one military historian notes, combined with Shaka's buffalo horns attack formation for surrounding and annihilating enemy forces, the Zulu combination of IKLW and shield, similar to the Roman legionaries' use of gladius and scutum, was devastating.